In the spring of 1945, as Nazi Germany collapsed, American soldiers captured one of the most valuable men in Europe. He was a brilliant engineer. He was also a member of the Nazi Party and an SS officer. The rockets he helped create were built with slave labor in underground factories where thousands of prisoners died from starvation, disease, beatings, and exhaustion. After his capture, the Americans didn't prosecute him. They gave him a job. And 24 years later, that man built the rocket that put Neil Armstrong on the moon. His name was Wernher von Braun. Meanwhile, the Soviets were way ahead of the Americans. They had the first satellite, they had the first animal in orbit, they had the first man in space, they had the first woman in space. America looked hopelessly behind. The country's early space efforts had become a national embarrassment. So how did the Americans turn it around? They didn't do it through science alone. They did it with captured German rocket technology and a president who made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. To understand the space race, you first have to understand World War II, because the entire thing starts with a single weapon, the V-2 rocket. Germany 1944. The Allies are closing in on from both sides. Hitler is desperate. He needs a wonder weapon, something so terrifying it turns the tide of the war. And he puts his faith in a young, brilliant engineer named Wernher von Braun. Von Braun leads the development of the V-2, the world's first long-range ballistic missile. It travels at over 3,000 miles per hour. It carries a 1-ton warhead, and it falls from the sky without warning as it travels faster than the speed of sound. Between September 1944 and March 1945, over 3,000 V-2 rockets rained down on London and Antwerp. More than 9,000 civilians were killed. By 1945, the war is over. As Germany collapses, the Americans and the Soviets race to seize German rocket technology and capture the scientists behind it. It's called Operation Paperclip. The Americans secretly bring von Braun and more than 100 of his top scientists to the United States. They sanitize portions of their Nazi records. Meanwhile, the Soviets capture launch sites, blueprints, and a smaller group of German engineers. The US government knew exactly who they were bringing over. Von Braun had joined the Nazi Party in 1937 and had been made an SS officer in 1940. He knew slave labor was being used to build the V-2. But American officials decided his expertise outweighed the political cost. His wartime record was quietly set aside. Von Braun was never prosecuted. Instead, he was told to get to work. And both superpowers realized the same thing. Rockets weren't just weapons. They were symbols of technological and military superiority. The Cold War was beginning, and space became the ultimate propaganda battlefield. Now here's the Soviet side of the story, and in many ways it's even wilder than the American one. The Soviet Union had its own chief rocket designer. His identity was so closely guarded that almost nobody outside the program even knew his name. That man was Sergei Korolev, and his life was a nightmare. In the 1930s, Korolev was already a brilliant engineer with a passion for rockets, but during Stalin's Great Purge, he was arrested on fabricated charges in 1938. He was tortured at Moscow's Lubyanka prison. Later, he was sent to a Siberian gulag, where he spent months in the freezing gold mines before being transferred to a secret prison design bureau staffed by imprisoned scientists and engineers. There, he was forced to build weapons for the very state that had tried to destroy him. Eventually, the Soviet leadership realized they needed him. They put him in charge of building rockets. But even after his release, his work remained classified and his identity hidden from the public. To the outside world, he was known only as the chief designer. In 1957, he did something that shocked the entire world. He launched Sputnik 1, a polished metal sphere just 23 inches across that circled the Earth, transmitting a simple, repetitive beep signal. It carried just a simple radio transmitter. But the message was clear. The Soviets had gotten there first. America panicked. Newspapers called it a devastating blow. The Soviet media mocked America. Eisenhower tried to calm everyone down. He said it was just a hunk of metal, but only a few people believed him. Then, just a month later, Korolev launched Sputnik 2. This time there was a passenger, a stray dog named Laika, the first living creature to orbit the Earth. The Soviet leaders saw this as a great triumph. But there is a darker story to this. For more than 4 decades, Soviet officials maintained that Laika had survived for a week before being humanely euthanized in orbit. The truth remained hidden until 2002, when engineers revealed that she had actually died just hours after launch from overheating and stress caused by a failure in the spacecraft's thermal control system. America was desperate. They tried to launch their own satellite, the Vanguard rocket. It was supposed to be a triumph. It rose about 4 feet off the ground, lost thrust, crashed back down, and exploded in a massive fireball on live national television. The newspapers called it Flopnik. Then came the big one. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human being in space. He orbited the Earth for 108 minutes. He came down, parachuted into a field, and became an international celebrity overnight. The Soviets threw him a parade. The entire communist world celebrated. America had sent a man up too, Alan Shepard. But he didn't orbit, he went straight up and came straight back down. It was a 15-minute suborbital flight, in other words a glorified cannonball. John F. Kennedy was deeply concerned. He asked his advisors for a project so big, so audacious, that America could beat the Soviets at something, anything. They suggested landing a man on the moon. Nobody knew if it was even possible. The rocket capable of doing it didn't exist yet. Much of the technology needed to get there hadn't been developed. The entire thing was a pipe dream. But Kennedy had nothing else to offer. So he gave his famous speech about choosing to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. 400,000 Americans went to work on Apollo. $20 billion was spent. That's over $200 billion in today's money. And at the center of it all, leading the team that built the rocket that would take them there, was Wernher von Braun. The Soviets weren't sitting still. They had their own moonshot. Korolev was developing the N-1, a monster of a rocket designed to carry Soviet cosmonauts to the moon. But then, in January 1966, something terrible happened. Korolev went into the operating room for what was expected to be routine surgery. His body, weakened by years in the Soviet prison system, the torture, the starvation, and a broken jaw that had never healed properly, the months in the freezing Siberian gold mines, struggled to endure the operation. His damaged jaw made it difficult for doctors to insert a breathing tube when complications arose. He died during surgery. He was 59 years old. Without Korolev, the Soviet lunar program descended into chaos. There was no vision, no drive, no one to cut through the bureaucracy. The N-1 rocket failed launch after launch. One exploded on the launch pad in one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. Another crashed back down. The Soviet lunar program was falling apart. In 1967, the Americans suffered their own disaster. During a routine pre-launch test for Apollo 1 at Cape Kennedy, a fire broke out inside the command module, which was filled with pure oxygen. 3 astronauts died: Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. Trapped inside the sealed capsule, they succumbed to the rapidly spreading fire and toxic smoke before rescuers could reach them. The entire program was thrown into doubt, but von Braun and his team kept working. And then, in 1969, everything came together. July 16, Apollo 11 launches from Cape Kennedy. The Saturn V rocket, the culmination of von Braun's life's work, roars into the sky. 4 days later, on July 20, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin descend to the lunar surface. It was one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The Soviets publicly congratulated the Americans. Privately, they knew the race was over. They had lost. When the dust settled, the numbers were staggering. The United States mobilized 400,000 people and risked everything to beat the Soviets to a rock 238,000 miles away. And they had done it using a rocket led by a man who had once worked for Hitler. History is never clean. Von Braun went on to be celebrated as an American hero. He posed for photos with presidents. He died peacefully in 1977, surrounded by his family. His associate, Arthur Rudolph, who helped oversee the production of the Saturn V, wasn't so lucky. In 1984, he was investigated for his wartime use of slave labor. He renounced his U.S. citizenship and returned to Germany rather than face prosecution. Von Braun himself was never held accountable. The U.S. government had made a deal, and they intended to keep it. And Korolev, the man who built the rockets that made the Soviet Union a spacefaring nation. He died before the race ended. He never knew the outcome. He was buried in the Kremlin wall, the highest honor the Soviet state could bestow. 2 days after his death, the Soviet Union finally revealed the identity of the mysterious chief designer. For the first time, the world learned his name, Sergei Korolev. 2 men, one a Nazi who escaped justice, the other a Gulag survivor who never escaped the damage done to his body. Between them, they helped drag the human race off the surface of the Earth and into space. Neither was a hero in the simple sense, but both changed history. The space race was presented to the world as a competition between 2 superpowers. At its heart, it was also the life's work of 2 extraordinary engineers, one whose rockets had killed thousands, the other whose own government had nearly killed him, both racing toward the same destination from opposite sides of the Iron Curtain. Somewhere in that collision of ambition, ideology, survival, and moral compromise, humanity looked up from the Earth, reached into the darkness, and touched the moon.